My grandmother once told me that the only difference today between liberals and conservatives is that the liberals attend Mass at 5 o'clock and that the conservatives do it at 8. To me, it was not shocking that this was the only distinguishable characteristic between the opponents of a 60-year-old civil war, but rather that regardless of the socioeconomic status, political beliefs, and lifestyles, both of these groups pledged allegiance to the Catholic Church. In a country like Colombia, where a whopping 90% of the population has been baptized and thus formally admitted into the Catholic Church, an interesting dynamic exists between state, church, and the public display of imagery. Religious imagery occupies a variety of roles which all seem to be defined through their social context, asserting the idea that religion is an entirely social process, a set of rituals we carry out as a performance for the viewing of others. At first, this public display of sacred images could be taken as an attempt at group cohesion, as Durkheim would suggest. However, it is unlikely that a group that nominates such a high majority has any need to exert its presence by displaying religious imagery or wearing religious paraphernalia. I have grown up with religious imagery virtually decorating every room in my house. Even in the bathroom, there was a glow-in-the-dark statuette of the Virgin Mary, with her arms extended, her face peaceful, glowing at me while I spit Listerine into the sink. Though at first glance it may seem that religious imagery is intertwined with Latin American culture, definitely an heirloom from colonial times, to fully believe this would be completely disregarding to the other half of Latin American culture. After all, we consider ourselves to be mestizos, a hybrid or racial nomination describing someone with both white and native ancestry. Setting aside the various technological, economic, and social factors that led to Spanish culture emulating society instead of an Inca or Aztec one, it can be immensely instructive to analyze the places and times when religious imagery, specifically connected to colonialism and Spanish culture, appears, when it is summoned, who hides it, who displays it, and how indicative this is in the historical context that Latin America chooses to preface itself with. In 1492, when Columbus was able to sail the Great Blue, primarily because Queen Isabella, or Isabella la Católica, as she was referred to in my Spanish history class, believed that spreading Christianity was a cause of the utmost importance. Regardless of this being factual or not, Catholicism and the redemption of souls is the refuge history teachers and Colombians and Latin Americans in general usually take to preface and somewhat excuse the hundreds of thousands of Indians who died, the obliteration of their culture and all our culture in many ways, and the vanquishing of their history, or half our history. In the ships that accompanied the conquistadores and worksmen and sailors came priests ready to, quote, tame the savages. In every single town that was erected, the church was the most important building, and to this day there is not a single Colombian municipality, no matter how small, in which there is not a church found in the square of the town. The visual and physical presence of the church is a symbol of the omnipresence of God, and then related to that of the Queen and of Spain. It is a vigilant system erected, and it towers above any other building, and the whitewashed walls contrast harshly with the lush green of the Andes Mountains. Churches are decorated and were decorated in a very luxurious style. After all, they're supposed to emulate what heaven might be like, something to give people something to look forward to. Countless kilos of gold were used to decorate the walls, the statues, and the priests' garments. Emeralds were used to stud candlesticks, chalices, and crosses. Statues were made by the finest artists, and ultimately, religious imagery became a very impressive display of power. For one, only the Spanish had access to it, being the ones that promulgated it. On the other hand, the sheer opulence of churches, statues, and religious ornament made it so only the extremely wealthy could afford to build, maintain, and display them. Culturally, language and race made Catholicism difficult for the natives and mestizos to dominate. In terms of a power structure, the visual manifestations of religion were so luxurious and over the top that it made it physically impossible for these people to possess them, meaning that they were stuck in a completely subordinate role in church hierarchy. With the acquisition of independence, Catholicism became a type of hand-me-down from Spanish culture, and affiliation to the church meant that you belonged to a ruling elite or the rich landholders that had supported the crown in the fight for independence. With the dawn of the scientific revolution and with industrialization, religion lost some of its dominance over society, and the more educated and academic classes abandoned it as something that inhibited their intellectual growth rather than stimulating it. Crosses were tucked in. Virgin Mary statues were hidden away, and attending church became more of a community gathering rather than a religious experience. The middle class, if such a thing even exists in Colombia, along with the predominant lower class, the majority of the country, became the guardians of piety, proudly displaying the images of the various icons they have venerated through the unimaginable difficulties they endure on a daily basis. Such images, once associated with opulence and elitism, were seen by the upper class as stigmas of economic and social inferiority, while simultaneously being worn by the lower and middle classes as affirmation of the loyalty they have to Jesus, a variety of saints, and especially Virgin Mary. Through this dichotomy, religious images become a highly controversial subject, both popularized, modernized, and packaged as yet another element of the profoundly visual popular culture that saturates the world around us. In a cyclical fashion, this popularization of religiosity by the lower and middle classes has given it a certain appeal it lacked before. Lately, religious imagery has become a means of making profound social commentary among some artists in Colombian society, specifically artist Fernando Ortero for irony and social commentary, causing a lot of commotion because he depicted Jesus and the Archbishop of Bogota, but not nearly as much commotion as Virgin Mary's latest appearance in the Latin American version of Playboy. Unlike the power Diane X speaks about in Darshan, the relationship is reversed in Colombian interaction with religiosity. Instead of people feeling power and energy emerging and radiating from the image to the outside, it is the people that infuse the image with meaning and power by providing it with a social context. In this way, religious imagery becomes a marker, an old and outdated means through which the lower class finds meaning as well as conceived status, and another way through which the elite subordinates the poor by stigmatizing them, by labeling their customs as tacky, superstitious, and outdated, and promulgating the popular saying that rectifies that even in heaven, hierarchy exists.